This is Power BI and More with Business Solutions MVPs Scott Sewell and Joel Lindstrom. This episode is sponsored by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integrations affordable and painlessly easy. Check out their autumn 2017 release at kingswaysoft.com, featuring multi-threaded writing, support for Dynamics 365 version 9, integration with Eloqua and Oracle Marketing Cloud, and ETL documentation generator. And join us on October 30th when Daniel Kai from KingswaySoft will be our guest on CRM Audio. What country are you in today?
I'm in Vancouver, Canada. It is early morning. I'm looking out the window and metropolitan city, and I guess I'm used to New York, but I'm looking down and there's no cars or anything on the streets. Of course, it is 5 o'clock in the morning here, but anyway. So it's a lovely cloudy city here.
What are you working on these days?
This week I'm working with a major healthcare provider up here, an insurer up here in Canada, and we're going to look at how we deploy Power BI with CRM. And it was kind of interesting. This relates back to a question I got the other night. I presented at the Power BI user group meeting in New York, and somebody asked a question that was kind of simple at first, but it spawned off into this real big discussion with several people getting not heated, but everybody was pretty passionate about their answers in it. And the question was innocent enough, and the question was, why are there two different programming languages in Power BI? You've got, on one hand, DAX, which everybody hears about. That's the sort of statistical. It's not really a statistical language, but I'll call it that for the moment. And then you have one called M, just the letter M, but it's also called PowerQuery, which is more of an ETL-like language, something more like a language you could do things that you might be doing with SSIS with. Okay. And anyway, so we had this conversation, and so the first answer was pretty simple. The DAX really lets you calculate. It's more like the Excel formulas that calculate sums and averages, and then turns out roll-ups, and there's like multiple layers of things you can do with DAX, but it's really focused on taking data and calculating something. Okay, at its simplest terms.
Okay.
And then on the other hand, you've got this other tool inside there in the query part of Power BI called M, which is this really strange looking. I find it very difficult to use. Language for writing queries to extract data from another source and then do some transformations on that data as you're bringing it out of that source. It can write things like, okay, I want to look at this spreadsheet. I want you to skip the first 3 lines. The 4th line is going to be the header the column headers. Then work your way down and split this column into 2 columns, and it's all that kind of extracting, transformation and loading style effort. So you got these 2 different languages, are both based inside of Power BI, and so that kind of led to, why are there 2 languages in there? Why do you have that? Why do you have to do 2 different things? And by the way, I'm working on a database that has 24 million rows in it, and Power BI is really, really slow every time I publish it. So that this conversation was really fun because you had a lot of people engaged in the conversation, and we started talking about, Power BI is as I'm obviously a fanboy. I love working with it. And its strength is in the fact that you can have this one tool that will do all 3 things. It'll do the extracting and transformation of the data coming out of a data source. It'll do the calculations in the middle of it and build all the statistical and all the ways in which you roll up and calculate different slices of data, sort of a analytics layer. And then on the far end, it's got this visualization layer, which puts up really cool pictures and visuals on that. And it is a self-contained package. However, that's probably appropriate in only some. I mean, I would say it's probably appropriate in 50% or more of the cases. That's what's perfectly great to have all the way through. Is you've got this ETL, analytics, and visualization layer inside of Power BI. But when you start moving into bigger scale data sets, like if you're hitting multi-million row data sets, or data sets that are extremely slow from an extract layer, if it's a very difficult extract, or you have if it becomes a layer of complexity, it might mean that you want to split some of those workloads off. And we started talking about options that this person had for splitting it off. And, one of the most common options is to say, let's take this analytics and ETL layer out. Well, the easiest first one would be, let's just take the ETL layer out, do all your heavy lifting in SQL, and just expose the SQL view to Power BI.
Right.
That's one way.
That's the reality that enterprise customers usually have ETL tools of choice that they like. Be it SSIS, be it Scribe, be it Informatica, and so by playing nicely with those, that's a benefit, because people don't want to use another tool for another ETL. They want to use the standard usually.
Yeah, and within those tools that you mentioned, you can always effectively set up a pre-cleaned up and organized table that can be your source for Power BI. And everything goes into that table has already been scrubbed and organized and labeled correctly, and you've dealt with missing values. All that stuff is already taken care of. That's a very simple source. You're going to pull that directly in, run your analytics on it, and visualize it. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is kind of even separating it even further and saying, okay, if I pull all that data into Power BI, I am still loading Power BI with millions of records, millions of rows of data inside this desktop application. Now, Power BI does have this really impressive query, this compression engine in it that will allow it to hold much, much larger data sets than you might expect, but there's still a limit. There's still an area where it's not as efficient if you're just dropping monster data sets into it. That's where moving things out and saying, okay, we've got those three layers that I mentioned already. We got that ETL layer, we got the analytics layer. Let's move the ETL and the analytics layer out, and we can move those both to, like we mentioned before, analysis services. And when I put it in analysis services, I'm setting that up on a server, or I'm setting it in Azure, and either way I could throw a bunch of memory at it, and instead of putting 24 gigs of RAM on everybody's desktop to be able to process a really large data set, let's just put 50 gigs of RAM or something on a server, and then that will hold the one data set. It can process all that, compact it up, and then Power BI becomes that really cool visualization layer. All the ETL and the analytics are done at the server, at that core, that center point, and then everybody else can just consume that data. And when it visualizes in Power BI, it says, okay, I need the sum of this column. Okay, analytics services go, piece of cake, here you go, have that. And then it says, okay, I need the sum of this sliced by this value. Analytics says, got it, have it. So it becomes a really, really fast implementation approach, as well as then the advantage you have with maintainability is you only have all those queries are all in one place in that analysis services server, as opposed to everybody's desktop having their own version of that query string.
Okay.
So it really turned out to be a really interesting conversation with her, and kind of enlightening to some of the people that were in the room that had not scaled upwards or had tried to scale from the desktop up to the enterprise without kind of reassessing what they wanted to do with the thing in the meantime.
So let me ask you, PowerQuery versus DAX. So when you're using the PowerQuery query editor, it's building an M query behind the scenes, right?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
I'm saying when you are using PowerQuery, using the query editor in Power BI, what language is that creating behind the scenes? Is that M?
That's correct.
And
it's M.
And then when you want to do analysis expressions, that's DAX, right?
That's correct.
So if do most people need to learn M, or is the query editor powerful enough to write most people's queries?
I would say that it's powerful enough to write simple queries. When you get past just like, for instance, I was working with one of our colleagues that not too long ago, and he had gone through step by step, and made a change to this column, and then made a change to that column, and then gone over and deleted this column and reformatted this column, and ultimately he wound up with this really huge Power Query string. It was just this step after step after step after step, and some of them, and then he needed to edit some, and it's a very sequential thing. So if you edit something near the top, it can break stuff way down at the bottom. So it became convoluted. There are pieces of that, and there are pieces of it that you just can't do through the query editor. They'll get you close, but you may want to have a little more fine-grained control.
So is that the point? Is
the
point of the discussion you had then? Should you learn M and massage the query, or should you use SQL or SSIS or something else to build the data structure so it's simple enough so you can get what you want without having to go into the M with the Power Query?
Yeah, I think our discussion was, if your data sources are some sort of SQL-like structure, where it's a SQL or obviously Oracle, or even the CRM data source could be useful this way. If you've got that, and you have access to a SQL table, use that. Put all your transformations there. They're much easier to view, edit. They're probably faster because they're happening on the server. But if your data source is something like a big Excel file, you're probably going to be writing some M on that.
Right. You might work for a company that doesn't give you access to a SQL table to dump your CRM online data to, so you have to learn to massage it through M. So that's interesting.
It's not a particularly intuitive thing, although if you start reading it and start getting comfortable, it sort of makes sense. It's just a real step by step. This step depends on the previous step, which depends on the previous step. Just very linear. And again, if you start editing a little bit, you can blow it up pretty easily. But I don't know. So there's some smart people out there that can write this stuff natively. Not me, though.
This is reminiscent to me of back in the day, way back 3-4 years ago, when you and I were both architects and we wrote a lot of SSRS reports, because we would have these debates about, should you do your formulas and everything in your report, or should you do them in SQL? And you were always more of the do it in SQL guy. I was always the more let me see what I can do inside the RDL. So sometimes there's a preference there too. Whatever you're comfortable with. If you're comfortable with SQL and love building tables out and firing up SSIS, and maybe use something like Kingsway Soft that can instantly create the table for you, that's good. Yeah. But maybe you want to be the Van Gogh of the M language and be able to make amazing things happen there. There's not really a right or wrong answer.
I would say that I was right and you were wrong, but other than that,
whatever performs the fastest is what I say.
That's right. That's exactly right. And sometimes it's whatever you have access to in the organization, like I said.
This has been the Power BI and More podcast with Business Solution MVPs Scott Sewell and Joel Lindstrom. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts LLC. Follow Scott Sewell on Twitter at Scott Sewell. Subscribe to the CRM Audio Network of podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, or any place else that fine podcasts are available. You can email us at voice@crm.audio. Thanks again to our sponsors, Kingsway Soft and Alexa CRM.